1969. Think about that year for a moment. Really think about it. Neil Armstrong took one small step on the lunar surface while the whole world held its breath. 500,000 people descended on a dairy farm in upstate New York for 3 days of peace, love, and mud-soaked music that would become known as Woodstock. The Beatles played their last live concert ever, climbing onto a London rooftop while police scrambled to shut them down. And somewhere in between all of that history being made, the radio was playing some of the greatest songs ever recorded. Do you still listen to these 15 hit songs from 1969? Can you still remember every word, every hook, every emotional moment? Let's find out together. Starting with number 15. Number 15, in the year 25025, Zager and Evans, 1969, song came out of absolutely nowhere and stunned everyone in the music industry. Two guys from Lincoln, Nebraska, named Denny Zager and Rick Evans, had been playing small clubs and bars for years with almost no recognition. They were the definition of struggling musicians. And then suddenly, impossibly, they found themselves with the biggest hit in America.
In the year 35.
And not just for a week or two. In the year 25025, sat at the top of the Billboard charts for 6 straight weeks, which was remarkable for any song, let alone one this strange and unsettling. Yos, make no mistake about it. This song was genuinely strange. The lyrics were absolutely terrifying if you actually listen to them. Zager and Evans sang about the future of humanity, starting in the year 2525.
If man is still alive.
And then jumping forward in 1,000-year increments. The year 3535, the year 4545, the year 5555, all the way to 9595. And with each verse, with each leap forward in time, things got progressively, horrifyingly worse. Technology taking over human bodies. It was essentially a protest song disguised as science fiction, wrapped in a deceptively catchy melody. And in 1969, with the Vietnam War raging on television screens every single night and the Cold War hanging over everyone's head like a sword, people connected with this dark, prophetic vision of the future. The song sold over 4 million copies worldwide. It resonated in ways that perhaps even its creators didn't fully understand. And then something absolutely fascinating happened. Zager and Evans completely disappeared from the music scene. They never had another hit, not even close. They became perhaps the most successful one-hit wonders in pop music history. But in the year 25025, refused to fade away. It's been covered, sampled, referenced, and parodied countless times over the decades. Every single time we start worrying about artificial intelligence, about technology controlling our lives, about losing our humanity to machines, this song from 1969 suddenly feels relevant all over again. It was genuinely ahead of its time in every possible way. Number 14. Time of the Season. The Zombies. Here's one of the most bittersweet stories in the entire history of rock and roll music. The Zombies, a British band with tremendous talent, had already completely broken up when this song became a massive hit. They recorded it back in 1967 as part of their ambitious concept album Ozzy and Oracle, but their record label didn't believe in the project. The executives sat on the album, barely promoted it, released it almost as an afterthought.
It's the time of the season.
And essentially left it to die a quiet death on the shelves. By 1968, the band members had completely given up hope. They'd tried everything. Nothing worked. So they went their separate ways. Keyboardist Rod Argent started a new band. Lead singer Colin Blunstone launched a solo career under a pseudonym. The Zombies were officially finished, consigned to the dustbin of rock history as another promising band that never quite made it. But then something completely unexpected happened. A radio DJ in America, totally independent of any label promotion, started playing Time of the Season on his show, and listeners went absolutely crazy for it. They called in requesting it over and over. They bought copies. They told their friends. Word spread like wildfire.
What's your name?
What's your name?
Who's your daddy?
Who's your daddy?
That breathy, almost whispered, "What's your name? Who's your daddy? Is he rich like me?" became one of the most instantly recognizable hooks of the entire decade. The song absolutely dripped with psychedelic atmosphere. It was mysterious, it was seductive, it was hypnotic, it was completely unlike anything else on the radio at that time. By early 1969, it had climbed all the way to number 3 on the Billboard charts. But here's the real tragedy of the story. The band members couldn't even tour to support their biggest hit because the band no longer existed as a functioning unit. They had to watch from the sidelines as spectators to their own success. While their greatest achievement happened without them, the Zombies never got to share that spotlight together, never got to bask in the applause, never got to see the crowd singing along. But the song outlived the band by decades upon decades. That haunting keyboard riff still plays on classic rock stations every single day. It's been featured in dozens of movies and television shows. And whenever people think about late 1960s psychedelia, this is often the very first song that comes to mind. Number 13, A Boy Named Sue, Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash didn't just perform this song. He absolutely lived it. On February 24, 1969, the legendary Man in Black walked into the gates of San Quentin prison to perform for some of the most hardened, dangerous criminals in the entire California correctional system. He'd done prison concerts before, of course, including the legendary Folsom Prison Show the previous year. But this time, he had something special in his pocket.
Well, my daddy left home when I was 3, and he didn't leave much to Ma and me. Just this old guitar and
a brand new song that he'd barely had time to rehearse, that he'd learned just days before. The song was written by Shel Silverstein. Yes, that Shel Silverstein. The same gentle soul who wrote beloved children's books like The Giving Tree and Where the Sidewalk Ends. But this was absolutely, definitively, no children's song. This was a raw, profane, darkly funny story about a boy whose deadbeat father gave him the name Sue before abandoning the family entirely, leaving his son to fend for himself. The boy grows up getting into vicious fights everywhere he goes because of that ridiculous, humiliating name. He develops a thick skin, he gets tough as leather, he gets mean as a snake.
But the meanest thing that my daddy ever did was before he left, he went and named me Sue.
And when he finally tracks down his worthless father in a dive bar in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, they have the most brutal, chaotic brawl imaginable, kicking and gouging and biting in the mud and the blood and the beer, as Cash growled in that unforgettable baritone. Neum mates at San Quentin went absolutely wild with recognition and delight. They understood this story on a visceral level. They related to the anger, the betrayal, the desperate need for vengeance, the complicated father-son dynamics. And Cash himself, he could barely keep from laughing as he performed the song.
Seems I had to fight my whole life through.
You can actually hear him almost lose it several times in the recording, nearly breaking character as the absurdity of the lyrics gets to him. That live version shot to number 2 on the pop charts, number 1 on the country charts, and won a Grammy Award. To this day, 55 years later, fathers still joke about naming their son Sue. The song never, ever, ever gets old. Number 12, Touch Me, The Doors. The Doors were sitting at the absolute peak of their commercial power and cultural influence in 1969. Jim Morrison had become the most dangerous, unpredictable rock star in America. Their earlier hits like Light My Fire and Hello I Love You and People Are Strange had established them as the dark, mysterious princes of psychedelic rock. Morrison's leather pants, his poetic ramblings, his onstage provocations had made him either an icon or a menace, depending on who you ask.
Come on, come on, come on, come on. Touch me, babe.
So what did they do next? They added strings to their music and a saxophone solo, and suddenly Jim Morrison sounded romantic. Touch Me was a dramatic departure from absolutely everything their fans expected. The song was smoother, more sophisticated, more polished, almost like something from a Broadway musical rather than a rock concert. Robbie Krieger, the band's guitarist who actually wrote the song, originally titled it Hit Me. He wanted the opening line to sound like a boxing command. An invitation to throw a punch, but the rest of the band convinced him to change it to Touch Me for rather obvious commercial reasons. Some hardcore fans felt deeply betrayed. They thought the Doors had sold out completely. They wanted the darkness, they wanted the danger, They wanted the existential poetry about death and madness and breaking on through to the other side. But millions of other listeners loved this new, accessible sound.
I'm gonna love you till the heavens
Touch Me became the band's third number one hit. That gorgeous brass section gave the song a sophistication and grandeur that their earlier, rawer, more confrontational work had deliberately avoided. What makes this song even more poignant now, listening to it all these decades later, is knowing exactly what came next. Within just 2 years of this recording, Jim Morrison would be dead at the age of 27, his body found in a bathtub in Paris under circumstances that remain mysterious to this day. But Touch Me captures a specific moment in time when everything seemed possible for the Doors, when they were the biggest rock band in all of America, and when Jim Morrison was still very much alive, burning bright, destined for tragedy. Number 11. Crimson and Clover. Tommy James and the Shondells. This song was a complete accident of creative genius. Tommy James walked into a recording studio late one night with nothing but an engineer and some vague ideas swirling around in his head. No band members, no concrete plan, no real idea what he was going to create. He just wanted to experiment with some new studio equipment, particularly a tremolo effect that made everything sound like it was shimmering and vibrating and pulsing with energy. He started layering his own voice over and over again, creating these hypnotic, swirling, cascading vocals that sounded absolutely nothing like anything else on the radio at that time.
Crimson and Clover.
The result was something genuinely dreamlike, almost trance-inducing, completely unlike the poppy, upbeat, teen-friendly songs that Tommy James and the Shondells were known for producing. The band's record label executives were nervous when they heard it. This wasn't a normal hit single by any standard measurement. This was something weird, something experimental, something that might alienate their existing fan base. But Crimson and Clover connected with people on a deep, almost subconscious, nearly hypnotic level. The lyrics were almost completely meaningless in any literal sense, just impressionistic images and vague feelings washing over the listener. But that trembling psychedelic production made the song absolutely unforgettable.
My message is sweetness.
When Tommy James sang over and over at the climax of the song, you could literally hear his voice vibrating, shaking, pulsing with the tremolo effect. The song spent 2 glorious weeks at number 1. Since then, Crimson and Clover has been covered dozens upon dozens of times. Joan Jett took her harder-edged version all the way to number 7 in 1982. Prince himself performed it live on multiple occasions. The song keeps coming back across the decades because that swirling, dreamy, otherworldly atmosphere never stops being absolutely magical. Put on a really good pair of headphones and listen to Crimson and Clover in the dark sometime. You'll understand immediately why it still captivates people after all these decades. Number 10. Everyday People. Sly and the Family Stone. This wasn't just a song. This was nothing less than a full-scale revolution wrapped up inside a 3-minute pop single. Sly Stone, the visionary genius behind the band, had assembled something that simply did not exist anywhere else in American music. A band that was fully, openly, proudly racially integrated, with both black and white members standing together on stage, and with women playing instruments alongside men as complete equals.
Sometimes I'm right, and I can be wrong. My own beliefs are...
In 1969 America, just 1 year after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., that was genuinely radical. That was potentially dangerous. That was making a powerful political statement without saying a single word about politics. And then they released a song with the simplest possible message. We are everyday people. All of us, and we should accept each other exactly for who we are. Different strokes for different folks. That one simple phrase entered the American vocabulary permanently and never left. It became a way of saying live and let live that felt fresh and funky and absolutely, undeniably irresistible on the dance floor. Everyday People spent 4 weeks sitting at number 1 on the Billboard charts.
I'm everyday people.
The groove was completely undeniable, impossible to resist. Larry Graham's revolutionary bass line practically invented what would later become known as funk music and slap bass technique. The harmonies brought together different voices, different backgrounds, different experiences, all in perfect musical unity. The song preached tolerance and acceptance with a beat that made you want to dance joyfully, not march angrily. Sly and the Family Stone, influenced virtually every single funk and soul artist who came after them. Prince absolutely idolized them and borrowed heavily from their approach. The Red Hot Chili Peppers openly worshipped them. Everyday People has been sampled countless times in hip-hop productions, and the core message of the song, that message remains every bit as relevant today as it was in 1969, maybe even more so. Number 9. Build Me Up, Buttercup. The Foundations. If you had to choose the single catchiest, most impossible-to-forget song of 1969, this might very well be the one. From that impossibly bouncy opening piano riff to the sing-along chorus that absolutely everyone on the planet seems to know by heart, Build Me Up, Buttercup is pure pop perfection distilled into 3 minutes of joy. It is physically, neurologically impossible to hear this song without smiling. Your face just does it completely automatically whether you want it to or not.
Why do you build me up? Buttercup, baby, just a
The Foundations were a British soul group notable for being one of the very first racially integrated bands anywhere in the United Kingdom. They'd already achieved success with their earlier hit, Baby Now That I've Found You, but this new song took them to an entirely different level of popularity. The lyrics tell a simple, relatable story about a guy whose girlfriend keeps standing him up, keeps disappointing him, keeps building up his hopes, only to let him down over and over again. But here's the absolute genius of the songwriting. The melody is so joyful, so impossibly upbeat, so relentlessly cheerful that the heartbreak described in the lyrics doesn't feel sad at all. You're actually singing along to a song about romantic disappointment with a huge, stupid grin plastered across your face.
I need you more than anyone, darling. You know that I have from
That's a very special kind of songwriting magic that only a handful of artists in history have ever managed to pull off successfully. Build Me Up, Buttercup peaked at number 3 on the American charts. But its real, lasting legacy is what happened in the decades that followed its initial release. The song appeared prominently in the hit comedy film There's Something About Mary, and became a cultural phenomenon all over again for a new generation. Sports stadiums play it during breaks. Wedding DJs spin it at receptions. Karaoke bars around the world echo with enthusiastic, often drunken renditions of it every single weekend night. It's become one of those exceptionally rare songs that absolutely everyone knows, even if they don't consciously realize they know it. Number 8. Bad Moon Rising. Creedence Clearwater Revival. John Fogerty wrote this song shortly after watching a classic 1941 film called The Devil and Daniel Webster, which features a completely devastating hurricane as a key plot element. The imagery of nature turning violent, of destruction arriving whether you're prepared for it or not, of the end of the world being written across the sky in unmistakable signs, stuck with him powerfully.
Coming soon. I feel rivers overflowing.
He channeled all of that dark energy directly into Bad Moon Rising. The lyrics, if you actually pay attention to them, are genuinely apocalyptic. Bad moon on the rise, trouble on the way, earthquakes and lightning, rivers overflowing their banks. Don't go out tonight because it's bound to take your life. This is end of the world stuff.
Don't go around tonight. Well, it's bound to take your life.
The melody is so unbelievably upbeat, so foot-tapping, so cheerful and singable, that most people genuinely thought it was a happy song. The song has appeared in literally hundreds of films and TV shows over the years, almost always right before something terrible is about to happen on screen. The song reached number 2 in America and hit number 1 in the United Kingdom. Creedence Clearwater Revival released it in April 1969, and by year's end, they'd become one of the biggest bands in the entire world, with 3 separate songs landing in the year-end Top 100 chart. John Fogerty is still performing this song live today. More than 50 years after he wrote it, the song hasn't aged a single solitary day. Number 7. Honky Tonk Women. The Rolling Stones. One of the most turbulent, emotionally charged moments in the entire history of the Rolling Stones. They recorded it in London with their brand new guitarist Mick Taylor, who had just been brought in to replace founding member Brian Jones. Brian had essentially been pushed out of the band he'd created due to his increasingly erratic behavior and mounting drug problems. The recording sessions for Honky Tonk Women were tense but remarkably productive. Everyone in the studio knew they were creating something genuinely special. And then, just days after the recording sessions wrapped up, devastating news arrived. Brian Jones was found dead in his swimming pool at his country estate. He was only 27 years old.
Tried to take me upstairs for a ride.
The Stones were already scheduled to play a massive free concert in London's Hyde Park, and they made the decision to transform it into a public memorial for their former bandmate. Honky Tonk Women became the sound of a band in painful transition, pushing forward through personal tragedy, absolutely refusing to stop or slow down. That iconic cowbell intro is one of the most immediately recognizable sounds in the entire history of rock music. Just those first few percussive beats, before any other instrument even enters, and everyone in the world knows exactly what song is coming. Keith Richards' fuzzy, swaggering guitar riff drives the entire track forward with pure attitude and confidence. And Mick Jagger? He tells colorful stories about wild women he encountered in barroom brawls in Memphis and gin-soaked parties in New York City. His vocals absolutely dripping with innuendo and rock star attitude. Honky Tonk Women knocked in the year 250-25 off the top of the charts and stayed firmly at #1 for 4 consecutive weeks. It became the last #1 hit of the entire 1960s for the Rolling Stones. 55 years later, it remains an absolute staple of classic rock radio and still serves as a highlight of every Rolling Stones concert around the world. Some songs simply never lose their power. Number 6. Aquarius / Let the Sunshine In, The Fifth Dimension. This was the defining anthem of an entire cultural moment in American history. The Fifth Dimension, a sophisticated vocal group known for their impeccable harmonies, took 2 separate songs from the controversial, boundary-pushing Broadway musical Hair and fused them together into a 6-minute epic that essentially defined what people would forever after call the Age of Aquarius.
This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius.
Well, the medley worked like absolute magic from start to finish. It began with all that mystical astrology imagery, the moon in the 7th house, Jupiter aligning with Mars, peace guiding the planets, love steering the stars through the heavens. And then the song dramatically shifted gears into Let the Sunshine In, building steadily into this gospel-influenced explosion of pure, unbridled joy. And that repeated chant of Let the Sunshine In became nothing less than the mantra of 1969 itself. People sang it at anti-war protests. They sang it at outdoor concerts. It won 2 prestigious Grammy Awards, including the coveted Record of the Year, and it became the anthem of an entire era. When people try to imagine what the late 1960s felt like, this song captures absolutely everything: the hope, the optimism, the genuine belief that a better world was just around the corner waiting to be born. Number 5. Proud Mary. Creedence Clearwater Revival. Non Fogerty wrote this song on the very day after he was officially discharged from the Army Reserve. He'd been serving his country, doing his patriotic duty, watching his life and his musical dreams being put on hold while months ticked by. And then suddenly, miraculously, he was free. The overwhelming relief and pure joy of that newfound freedom poured directly and immediately into Proud Mary. The song tells a beautifully simple story about leaving behind a soul-crushing city job to ride a riverboat down the Mississippi River toward a simpler, happier existence. Left a good job in the city working for the man every night and day, but I never lost 1 minute of sleeping, worrying about the way things might have been. The imagery was pure Americana at its most romantic, conjuring up timeless visions of Mark Twain and paddle wheel steamboats, and a way of life that most listeners had only read about in books. Big wheel keep on turning, Proud Mary keep on burning. That instantly memorable chorus became one of the most recognizable in rock history. Creedence Clearwater Revival released the song in January 1969, and it shot up to number 2 on the charts. It was their major breakthrough moment, the song that transformed them from a regional band into international superstars.
Job in the city, working for the maid and the night and day.
And then, 2 years later, something truly amazing happened. Ike and Tina Turner recorded their own explosive version of Proud Mary. Tina's legendary interpretation started slow and sultry, almost spoken word, then built and built into an absolutely volcanic wall of sound that some people argue might actually be even better than the original. Now, there are two completely classic versions of Proud Mary in existence, and music fans still passionately argue about which one they prefer. That's the ultimate sign of a truly great, endlessly interpretable song. Number 4. Suspicious Minds. Elvis Presley. Let's talk about one of the absolute greatest comeback stories in the entire history of popular music. By 1969, Elvis Presley had become something of a joke to many music fans and industry insiders. He'd spent most of the 1960s making one forgettable, formulaic movie after another with equally forgettable soundtrack albums. He'd watched helplessly from the sidelines as the Beatles and Rolling Stones and countless other bands completely took over rock and roll, the very genre he had helped invent. He surrounded himself with some of the very best session musicians in the country, and he poured absolutely everything he had left into these new recordings. The result was Suspicious Minds, a devastating song about a relationship being slowly destroyed by jealousy, mistrust, and paranoid accusations.
Because I love you too much, baby.
The emotion was raw and palpable, and Elvis sang the song like his entire career and legacy depended on convincing the listener, because in many ways it absolutely did. Suspicious Minds became Elvis Presley's first #1 hit in 7 long years. It would also tragically be his last #1 hit ever. But what an incredible way to prove that the King still had exactly what it took to connect with audiences. It's regularly ranked as one of the greatest recordings of his entire legendary career. Number 3. Sugar, Sugar, the Archies. Here's something that drove serious rock critics and music snobs absolutely insane throughout 1969. The biggest hit of the entire year, the song that outsold the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Creedence Clearwater Revival and Elvis Presley and absolutely everyone else, was performed by a band that didn't actually exist as flesh and blood human beings. Archies were cartoon characters from a Saturday morning television show based on the famous comic book series. The song itself was recorded by anonymous session musicians, with a singer named Ron Dante providing the cheerful lead vocal. Legendary songwriters Jeff Barry and Andy Kim wrote it, carefully crafting what might be the purest, most concentrated example of bubblegum pop in the entire history of recorded music.
Sugar, oh, honey, honey.
4 million record buyers didn't care even slightly about authenticity or credibility. They didn't care that the Archies were drawings on a television screen. They simply loved the song. And honestly, the actual songwriting was secretly brilliant. Just try getting Sugar, Sugar out of your head once it starts playing. You literally cannot do it. The song spent 4 weeks at #1 and became the best-selling single of the entire year. An astronaut on the Apollo 12 mission even brought a copy to the actual moon. It's been featured in movies, commercials, and television shows continuously for more than 50 years. A band made entirely of cartoon characters produced the single most popular song of one of the most culturally significant years in rock history, only in 1969. Number 2. Get Back. The Beatles with Billy Preston. The Beatles were falling apart in 1969, and absolutely everybody who paid attention to the music industry knew it. The recording sessions for what would eventually become the Let It Be album, later documented in stunning detail in Peter Jackson's remarkable documentary series, revealed a band in serious crisis. John and Paul were fighting constantly about creative direction. George felt dismissed and disrespected by his bandmates. Ringo seemed lost and uncertain. The magic that had made them the biggest, most influential band in human history was visibly, painfully fading away, and there seemed to be nothing anyone could do to stop it. But somehow, impossibly, almost miraculously, they still managed to create moments of pure magic. Get Back was Paul McCartney's deliberate attempt to strip things down to absolute basics.
Don't let me down.
To get back to where the Beatles had originally started before all the experimental production and orchestral arrangements. No fancy orchestras, no elaborate studio tricks, no endless overdubs, just guitars, bass, drums, and Billy Preston's phenomenal soulful electric piano, which added a funky groove that the song desperately needed. The song went to #1 in both America and Britain, but its real, lasting legacy is the legendary rooftop concert. On January 30th, 1969, the four Beatles climbed up to the roof of their Apple Corps headquarters in the middle of London and started playing live for the first time in over 2 years. It would also be the very last time they ever performed together as a band. Office workers in surrounding buildings poured into the streets below, craning their necks to see what was happening. Traffic stopped completely. The police eventually arrived to shut down the impromptu concert due to noise complaints, but for approximately 40 magical minutes, the Beatles reminded the entire world exactly why they were the greatest rock band ever assembled. John Lennon's famous sign-off at the end, "I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves, and I hope we've passed the audition," remains one of the most iconic moments in music history. And #1, Sweet Caroline, Neil Diamond. If you've ever been to a baseball game, you know this song. If you've ever been to a bar at closing time, you know this song. If you've ever been to a wedding reception where the DJ actually understood the assignment, you know this song. If you've ever been anywhere that large groups of people gather to celebrate anything, you almost certainly know this song. Sweet Caroline might genuinely be the most universally beloved sing-along anthem in all of American history.
Where it began, I can't begin to
Neil
know.
Diamond wrote it in approximately 1 hour, sitting at his piano in his Los Angeles home. He later said the melody simply came to him fully formed, complete, like it had been waiting somewhere out in the universe for him to discover it. The song was originally inspired by Caroline Kennedy, the young daughter of President John F. Kennedy, though Neil Diamond didn't publicly admit that particular detail until several decades later. When Sweet Caroline was initially released in 1969, it reached #4 on the Billboard charts. A solid, respectable hit by any measure, but certainly not a cultural phenomenon. Not yet. The true phenomenon came decades later, when sports stadiums across America discovered that playing Sweet Caroline during games transformed entire crowds of strangers into one massive, enthusiastic sing-along choir. The Boston Red Sox adopted it as their unofficial anthem at Fenway Park, playing it during every home game. Now virtually every stadium in America does the same thing. And here's the beautiful, almost magical thing about it.
Now I look at the night.
That's the extraordinary power of Sweet Caroline. It brings people together. 55 years after Neil Diamond casually wrote it in an afternoon, the song is somehow more popular than ever, and crowds around the world are still singing it like it was released just yesterday. 15 songs from 1969 that changed music forever, songs about love and loss, songs about revolution and unity, songs about cartoon characters and Louisiana riverboats and suspicious minds, songs about futures we've now lived to see and dreams we're still chasing. 1969 was a year when anything seemed genuinely possible. Human beings walked on the surface of the moon. The music is completely, absolutely timeless. It was timeless then, and it remains timeless now. If you enjoyed this trip back in time, hit that subscribe button and become part of our community. Leave a comment below and tell us which 1969 song is your personal favorite. Which one still gives you chills after all these years? Which one takes you instantly right back to a specific moment, a specific memory, a specific feeling from your own life? We genuinely love to hear your stories. Thanks for watching, and keep the music playing.